Hello, Kirk. I am very glad to see you again.
And I'm glad to see you again as well, Jan.
Yeah, we expand our activity. We talk with foreigners. We have an interview even with the prince of the head of a state, Prince of Liechtenstein. And I think that you are among our most important guests in our channel. So I am very happy to have you again. And today's topic is your reflections or your is it the right word in English? Reflections on Trudeau?
Reflections is a good word to use, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll talk about the, let's say, collapse of Canada. So how you perceive the Justin Trudeau management of your country? How long he was in power?
I would say, in a word, it's been a disaster.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, disaster isn't a good word, and there's ways to measure that, but even the fact that he even gained power is, we have to analyze how did a man so unqualified and so incompetent gain that top position in Canada, and how do we know where Canada is now by comparison? Like, is there an objective way to measure? And I think first of all, it's almost become an embarrassment to be Canadian at this point, because everything about Canada has deteriorated so badly under his term in office. But one of the big indicators right now is that the newly elected President Trump has been talking about making Canada as a 51st state. And almost everybody I hear in Canada is reacting to Trump's statement, but they're not thinking about why is it that the President of the United States would even make a statement like that. That's what we need to think about. The mere fact that he is making statements like that is an indicator of just how far Canada has fallen under the leadership, or lack thereof, of Justin Trudeau in every way. So it's just a disaster everywhere we look. And
Kirk, my proposal is that we can divide our interview into three, let's say, parts. The first one, what is the damage and how did it occur? I know that you have a couple of examples of this and how he was elected. I would like to discuss with you how it happened that the people like him are able to be elected so that the people vote for them. And then maybe we can draw some conclusions and maybe we can learn something from this history. Okay, so if you accept this schedule, let's say, or agenda, so
yeah.
let's can you name all these problems you see during his governance?
Yes, I would say the damage, let's just take a quick look at some of the damage. First of all is our reputation internationally. And the example I just mentioned about the new president of the United States talking about Canada as if we could be a 51st state. That's political damage. That's a damage in our credibility, in our status as a nation. And then there's the financial damage that he has done to this country. For example, when he was elected in 2015, Canada's debt to GDP ratio was 31%. But in 2023, it had almost doubled, well, in fact, more than doubled, to 69%, the debt to GDP. Now, it reminds me of something that Justin Trudeau said when he was running for the first election in 2015. He said that the budget will balance itself. And people saw that either as a joke or as incredibly naive. And now we see that he actually was incredibly naive. He had no competency at all in budgeting and financial management, even given his upbringing. So that's part of the damage, is the financial. But it didn't stop there in our debt to GDP ratio. It also, we've seen a massive increase in inflation. And for example, there's probably two reasons for that, at least two reasons. One reason is that during COVID, he flushed almost $250 billion into Canada. He just basically printed money and flushed it in, gave it away to Canadian citizens during COVID. Well, the problem with that is that there was still the same number of goods, same amount of groceries, same amount of housing. And so suddenly you had a huge increase in cash for the same amount of commodities and housing and groceries. So what that led to was an unprecedented, well, maybe not unprecedented, but a rapid increase in inflation. But then what happened is that his policy was to try and rescue the Canadian economy by bringing in a lot of new immigrants who would bring money into the country. And that has happened. He's brought over 1 million immigrants into Canada over the last few months, or the last couple of years. And with that came money, but that was still for the same amount of housing, the same amount of groceries. And what we then saw was a massive demand for housing and a supply that simply could not even begin to meet that demand. And the consequences were is that the price of housing just shot through the roof. It skyrocketed. And it's to the point now where lower to middle starter homes or apartments or condominiums are now unaffordable to a huge percentage of Canadians. For example, in the old days, a Canadian wanting to start acquiring a house or ownership in a dwelling would buy what we call a starter home. A very small home, maybe a duplex, two homes joined with one wall. And from there, they would then build their way up. But now they cannot even afford starter homes. They cannot even afford apartments. And so this is another way that has forced the price of commodities and groceries and basically everything up. The third factor was the carbon tax, which he instituted. And many people just thought that would mean an increase at the gas pump for normal people driving. But no, they did not realize that the clothes they buy at the supermarket have to be transported to the supermarket. They did not realize is that the cost of a new apartment or a house, you have to build into the cost of transporting all those materials, and not just transporting those materials, but manufacturing them as well. And so it turned out that the carbon tax became part of everything that Canadians need, not just gas at the pumps, but the price that increased the price of groceries, the price of clothing, the price of housing in every way. So there's three main factors involved in inflation in Canada. And it's not, our problem is not merely inflation, there's simply not enough housing for people to even find places to live. And the number of homeless people in Canada has greatly increased during Trudeau's term in office. So that's just the financial damage that has been done to this country. And then there's a number of other areas as well.
So he used to be the prime minister since 2015.
That's correct. But he's only had a minority government for the last 2 terms. And unfortunately, our most left-wing party, the NDP, decided that they would kind of be partners with the minority Liberal government so that the Liberal government could govern, but the NDP could get certain things passed as well. And this has kept the Justin Trudeau in power for almost 10 years now, basically 10 years. So the damage has just continued to increase. I don't have the latest figures. I was trying to find the latest figures, and it's difficult to find the latest figures for 2024, and of course 2025 is yet to elapse, but we know that the damage has increased, the financial damage, the debt. The debt has become to the point where just, what is it? We have an enormous, let's say, just the service, the interest on the debt it's $81.8 billion of interest on our federal debt, and that was just for 2023. That has since increased. So of all the taxes that we pay to the federal government and to the provincial governments, right off the top, $82 billion just goes into interest payments. And a lot of that debt is held by people outside of Canada in the form of various investments, T-bills and GICs and so forth, T-bills mainly. So the money, $82 billion, that could have been used, say, for our medical needs, for Medicare, which is our government established and supported program for medicine here in Canada, it could have been used for that. We would have a phenomenal medical system here in Canada if we could pour $82 billion into it per year. But instead, that $82 billion is going out largely outside the country. And the price of everything, because it's gone up, even our Medicare system is in a slow collapse as well. The prices, the wages for doctors and nurses have to be kept low enough so they can afford it, but doctors and nurses are looking at the United States and realizing they can make a lot more money in the US, and so we have an enormous migration or exit of doctors and nurses who've been trained and educated here in Canada. They're leaving the country and going to the United States, and the result is that around 21% of Canadians now do not have any medical, like they don't have a doctor to take care of them that they can go visit. So they have to go to clinics on the street, 24-hour clinics, or to get some health care. But there's enormous waits, they're badly overworked, and our whole Medicare system is turning into a train wreck in slow motion, simply because cost cutting due to financial debt and so forth, it's a disaster as well. So that's another area of great damage that has occurred in Canada, is our whole medical system, which is it's a government medical system, socialist aspect kind of medical system, and it is slowly collapsing as well.
And how Canadians perceive his governance? Do they call him destroyer, or just they explain, okay, he did all his best, but it happened just like this?
No, Canadians, I think, no, I'm not sure about this, but I haven't got the latest statistics on his popularity compared to other prime ministers, but it's one of the lowest in history. Sometime, maybe almost a year ago, he was ranked as the lowest in popularity over the last 50 years, but it has gone down a lot since then. Canadians aren't, I would say Canadians are so disappointed that disappointed is not the word anymore. It's frustrated. They are angry. And all over the place, I will see people with slogans against Trudeau, slogans that are very crude and profane. I can't repeat them here, but you'll see those hanging in public places here in Canada. When he goes out in public, and just recently over the Christmas holidays, he was skiing in British Columbia, and a woman in the parking lot again told him that he's not welcome in British Columbia, which is one of our western province. And I think Canadians, by and large, are very angry at what happened. The polling is abysmal that he has. His own party has rebelled against him. In fact, about a month ago or so, his finance minister resigned and said some very critical things about Justin Trudeau. And the finance minister is one of the most important jobs in the Canadian government. But on the other hand, the finance minister, Justin Trudeau appointed her, she was actually a journalist. Now, just think about this for a second. A journalist being appointed as a finance minister. managing hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, to be fair, as a journalist, she would write about businesses, but it's a totally different world to write about business and to actually manage a multi-billion-dollar corporation, which is essentially what a country is. There is not even the same thing. I know as a scientist, I watch science writers writing about science, and a lot of them, they have a conversant knowledge of science, but they make huge mistakes because they don't understand. They've never actually got a degree in science, many of them. And in her case, she didn't even have a degree in accounting or business management. She was a journalist. But this was an example of Justin Trudeau's policy. And when he got elected, his number one goal was not to make Canada better as far as a better place to live financially. His number one goal was to impose, I would call it wokeism in Canada. It was a social engineering project. He had these opinions. Now keep in mind, they weren't opinions that had surfaced as a matter of being well read or well researched. Not at all. He was a drama teacher, raised in a wealthy home where he never had to work, he never had to manage a budget, and he just had these dreams about, he just embraced wokeism. And so his very first cabinet, and in Canada the cabinet is composed of people who are responsible for the different departments of government. So his very first cabinet was just an example of that. We had 74% of the elected members of parliament were men, 26% were women. But he chose a gender-based cabinet, that is half and half men, half women. And so it turned out that he got 15 women out of 88 88 women elected, and 15 men were chosen cabinet positions out of 258 men elected. So that works out to be 17% of elected women were given top positions in government, compared to only 6% of elected men being given these top positions. Now, there would be highly qualified men, there would be highly qualified women in those elected members of parliament. But it would probably work out to roughly the same percentage of women would be highly qualified as the same percentage of men would be highly qualified. So when you automatically promote what he did, we could see that there was nothing to do with qualifications, to be the top members of Parliament, the governing bodies of Canada, and everything to do with gender. In fact, when he was asked why he did this, his reason was, and I quote, "because it's 2015, end quote. You cannot run a nation, you cannot run a multi-billion-dollar corporation with that kind of mentality, with that criteria, in order to run a government. Instead, what you need are the best qualified people. And it doesn't matter whether they're male or female, not in the least. All that matters is who are the best qualified people to manage these major government departments." And this just went on. A lot of his for the first term in office had to do with just public persona. In fact, there's another problem and an issue that not only, you see, he believed firmly that he is right. In fact, I just watched an interview this morning with a former Liberal member of Parliament who was elected along with Justin Trudeau. And this insider said that one of perhaps the most serious problem with Justin Trudeau is that he believed that he was right about everything. It didn't matter how unqualified he was, that was irrelevant to him. He believed he was right. He believed you didn't need qualifications if you are right.
I would like to interrupt here because I think that this feature concerns the vast majority of politicians. There is no feedback. The feedback it's a concept from technical sciences, and representative democracy in Canada and also in Poland and in majority of countries, there is lack of indicators how you run the country. If you drive your car, you have indicators. You have your velocity, you have the consumption of gas, and so on and so on. There is indicators. When you fly a jet, for instance, you have more indicators. But
Yes.
I don't know why the people didn't install such a table of indicators about the country, whether the country is better than our country the last year or it is worse. What are the reasons? Okay, we can expect that some people will cry, but nobody is crying. Nobody is shouting that the country is going down. It is a case in Canada. The same case it is in Poland. Nobody is crying. I talked to the friend of mine who is chief executive in the highest school of economics in Warsaw, and I said, okay, do they run the country well? He gazed at me and he said, no, of course no. So I said, why you do not protest? Why you don't go to the minister or to the prime minister and say, listen, from the economical point of view, you are doing only errors. You are not improving our country. And his response was, I would like to become a professor in the nearest future. He's dependent on the state. So I think that from the technical point of view, our countries are not organized at all, I would say. What do you think about this?
Well, you have raised a very important point, extremely important, and that is the role of the people in what sort of government they will elect and what happens when it's not going in the right direction. There's a number of things that could be talked about there. Unfortunately, I think people, at least in Canada here, I wouldn't call us a socialist country, but socialism is a significant portion of our government or the government policy or even the mentality of Canadians. But there's a problem with that. And that is when the government starts giving people free things, then the people start voting for the people who will give them the most free things. And in this case, it was patently obvious that Justin Trudeau was making promises. He was saying phrases like, and I quote, sunny days are coming, when in fact he had no clue how to deliver on those sunny days. But the mere fact that he said those things, and that he said he was going to do things that would basically give Canadians more free stuff, meant that it corrupts democracy, because people then begin to vote for the person, not who's the most qualified, but the person who will give them the most free things. And what's going to happen next is that at some point the country is collapsing enough that people begin to notice, and this has happened here in Canada. The whole country now is almost in a panic mode as to what's happening with Canada, and they're all finally blaming the federal government. Going back to the COVID time, Justin Trudeau thought that giving people $250 billion during COVID would boost his popularity. It wasn't for the good of the economy. It was to boost his popularity. Then just before Christmas, he declared a tax holiday. This is on sales tax. So sales tax, and he hoped the province would join in, and in Ontario that means 13% tax was suddenly removed for a few months. And this is one of the reasons Chrystia Freeland, our finance minister, resigned. She says this is just a gimmick, a popularity gimmick. But what it really was is an attempt to purchase votes, to buy votes. And normally it used to be illegal to buy votes, but in a country that leans more and more towards socialism, they will elect the person who promises the most free things, which is essentially the person is buying votes by making all these empty promises that they won't be able to deliver on. But the big question is, what can we learn from this? It's one thing to voice our frustration here, and all of Canada now is frustrated. Some estimates indicate that if we had an election right now, the Liberal Party would only get between 2 and 6 votes, 6 seats in Parliament, which is not even enough to qualify as an official party. That's how angry Canadians are. And this is, when you talked about indicators, there are indicators, but the politicians don't pay attention to them. And the people are not thinking critically and rationally. So I read the financial news every day because the finances are one indicator of where things are going. So I think Canadians and people in every country where there's a democracy, we need to think very carefully, what do we need to do and put into place to avoid this disaster? And people can now look at Canada as an example of just a complete disaster. We should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We have enormous natural resources. And one of the policies of the federal government was to sell our natural resources, not sell the resources themselves, but sell the companies that mine these resources outside to other countries, to China, for example, so that China holds a lot of power in Canada simply because of the amount of companies they own here in Canada. That right there is a thing that is very potentially damaging. Selling your natural resources. So anyways, what do we need to put into place? And I'm not very optimistic that we will do it because the general population has moved away from thinking rationally and objectively about things, and they moved toward, what do I want? What are my rights? So about 150 years ago, the average person made big decisions like what they will do with their life, what they will do in their community. They made these big decisions on the following criteria. What are my obligations to God? What are my obligations to my country? What are the obligations to my community? What are the obligations to my family? What are my obligations? So the defining criterion was, what are my obligations to serve God, my country, my community, and my family? Over the last 150 years and rapidly over the last few decades, that has shifted now so that the primary criterion now is, what do I want and what are my rights? And when people start thinking, what do I want? They're no longer thinking about the good of their country, their community. They're just thinking about, what can I get? So when a politician promises them to give them lots of free things, they don't worry about a debt. They just worry about, how much am I going to get in this sinking ship? So if the ship is sinking and all the people are thinking about, what do I want? They're not worried about saving the sinking ship. They're worried about themselves personally. And somehow people need to make the connection between their own personal well-being and not just them. They gotta stop thinking about their own personal well-being. They have to start thinking about their children's well-being and their grandchildren's well-being. What are the long-term consequences of electing this person versus that? So people need to, first of all, decide, what are the essential components of a government? What do they need to really focus on, and what should they not focus on, or what are lower priorities? And secondly, what sort of qualifications does this politician have with regard to satisfying those criteria? And third, what psychological problem? And psychological problem is is a major problem amongst politicians. And this was restated just this morning when I listened to that member of parliament, former member of the Liberal government. He said the majority of politicians, when they get elected and they go to Ottawa and they get in office and they start carrying a briefcase, they suddenly start feeling more important than everybody else. And it feeds their own sense of value and significance, of self-worth, and they begin to think too much about that versus serving their country and serving the people that elected them. And in Justin Trudeau's case, he is a diagnosed, and I'm quoting Jordan Peterson here, who's a psychologist, he's a diagnosed narcissist. That is a person who wants everybody to like him and reacts very badly if everybody doesn't like him. But he wants everyone to like him, and he wants that so bad that he's willing to take the whole ship down with him if they don't like him. In his case, he's willing to see the country slowly destroyed, spiral down into oblivion for the sake of his own desire to have public affirmation. And so when we look at politicians, we have to look at their track record. How well did they serve? For many politicians, they might start off on a local level, a politician for the local township or municipality or the mayor of a city. We have to look at them and how well did they serve their people? And does he or she have a psychological problem that's going to, for example, the leader of the NDP party, and this is not a secret I'm sharing here, this was constantly talked about in the news, did not want the government to go down because in Canada you have to stay elected for 2 terms in order to qualify, in order to receive a lifetime pension, which is a very generous pension because the members of parliament decided themselves what sort of lifetime pension they will get. So he had to make it through 2 terms, and if he brought the government down too soon, before the end of this January, the end of this month, then he wouldn't qualify for that pension. And this is known right across Canada. Now, when you see a politician like that, that politician's name should go immediately on your list of people you will never vote for again, ever. And the people that supported him on this. So
people have very small memory, you know, they forget very fast. Can be convinced by a few sweet words, and they revolt these bastards.
and in a sense, you're right. And in a sense, we get what we deserve. And I say we on a general sense. There's thinking people out there that just have to go down with the sinking ship. I'm on a sinking ship. I can't get off, and it's. I don't want to describe them, but it's people who, it's unqualified people that are running the ship. And I'm saying unqualified, and that's an understatement. That's an understatement. But it's also Canadians that are voting for these people. And they're voting for selfish motives. What will this politician give me? And they don't even think far enough ahead to distinguish between what will this politician say he's going to give me, and what can he actually deliver? Is he able to deliver on that? They never think about that. Most Canadians do not think about that second question. So even if they want to vote for themselves, they're voting for empty promises or unqualified people. It's astounding that people, I think, what has to happen, and I'm sorry to say this, but what has to happen is things have to get bad enough. It basically has to collapse into a crisis situation before people will wake up and start to think, what can we do so that this never happens again? We need to study history. We need to learn from past historical mistakes. And that would be wonderful if the teachers and the professors of history were thinking objectively, but many of the teachers and the professors in our university today have a very left-wing socialist agenda. So the kind of ways they interpret history is not objective. And so the place continues to burn all around.
It's a self-propelled propelled mechanism, I would say, with a positive feedback. So
Exactly.
it goes faster and faster all the time. You know, I have a very good example of a film, of a movie from Poland. It was issued in 1979, so before 10 years before the collapse of economy and transformation period in Poland. And you know, it was full communist this time, but they started to analyze the situation of workers in a factory. And it was maybe two, maybe five parts of this, and they discuss basic issues of capitalism and socialism. And you know, I saw that this way of thinking, because the people were already hungry. They could not buy anything. They saw that everybody is not working, that everybody is just talking and making good impression. So so in this movie, the people started to think how economy works. It lasted. In 10 years, it drive us to change the system. But nowadays, we are going back. You have your Justin Trudeau, and we have the similar, you know, very nice faces, talking sweet words, and they attract people, and the people vote for them, and they give the empty promises. So you and me as engineers, we can see that this mechanism doesn't work. What we can do about this?
I think all we can do is, I think it's important for thinking people to start to get online, to begin trying to influence as best as they can. I don't have, I just have to do my own little part. We can write articles, we can start a blog, we can get online, we can start doing YouTube videos, we can start talking to people in our community about this. But I find you have to be careful because it's such a charged atmosphere that people are so out of touch with thinking rationally that they don't even recognize a good argument. And essentially, I will burn bridges immediately if I start talking to people if I start giving them the solution. I have to start a little further back. I have to learn the art. And here's another excellent approach. Learn the art of asking the right questions. So, for example, you might ask, how do you think we got here financially? And see what they have to say. And this has to be done by lots and lots of people who are getting very concerned and very worried about the country. Now, I'm still not optimistic that will work, because sometimes you have to have a complete apocalypse before people will wake up. And I fear, and I know already the next government is afraid of what's going to happen to them, because the next government is going to have to make cutbacks. They're going to have to reduce spending if they're going to get control of this financial debt. And immediately the people will start screaming because some of the free stuff they've been given will be pulled back. But people have to realize that even in our own homes, we have to sometimes cut back on our spending if we're going too far into debt. We have to cut back. And debt is a bad thing normally. So I feel like I'm on a train that is out of control. There's a bridge out ahead, and the train is being run by lunatics, and I can't get off. But in the meantime, I can at least try and persuade people. That, and think tanks. I think think tanks, formal groups of people who think through public policy. And the Heritage Foundation, for example, in Washington, D.C., I visited that think tank. I was very impressed. We have one in Canada called the Fraser Institute, and I think they do a very good job, but the Liberal government didn't want to listen to them. In fact, the Fraser Institute did a study on carbon tax and how that affects people's use of fuel, and they found there was no detectable change, none. But yet the federal government, Justin Trudeau, believed it's going to save. Here's another problem, I think. In times like this in Canada, people begin to look for a savior. A savior who will be able to save the country, but at the same time still give them free stuff. Don't look for a savior. Not that kind of a savior. There's no way to save the country and still give you everything that you want when it gets to this condition it's in. We need someone who we may not like, but who is a very careful thinker, who has qualifications, and elect people who have qualifications. I personally think, and this is just my opinion, I would get into trouble if I said this too loud here too many times, but I think there needs to be qualifications before a person can even run for office, run for a member of parliament. They should have reached a certain, let's say, I think at least 30 years of age. And the reason that I would say that is that you need a certain amount of life experience. You need to actually have had a job. I know many people who've been running for politicians who've never had a real job. Never. They've always been involved in politics at a small level. I know one fellow who was just basically living off government support, and he ran for a member of parliament. Never had a job, never had to support himself. But he had all these big ideas on how to socially engineer Canada so that we would all be woke. That is a recipe for a complete apocalypse. So there needs to be certain qualifications, I think, a country needs to put into place before a person even qualifies to be a member of parliament. And I know that there's this tendency to say, well, look, we need young people to get their perspective, and there's some to be said for that, but they have not at the same time had more than a few years of life experience behind them. So young people as advisors, in some way, we need to find out what young people want, and what, not so much what they want, but where they're going, what the trends are. But at the same time, we need people with life experience behind them before we even elect them into parliament. Have they owned a company? What have they done to support themselves? What's their track record?
I think also that we have to change the system, because when anybody is becoming a man in power, we have this famous proverb of Lord Acton that the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So as you mentioned already, that the people, when they moved to Ottawa and they became parliament members, they consider themselves better, far better than they were before. And, they also see that they can steal, let's use this word, that they can steal public money for free. Just they raise taxes or they print money and everything is going right. So as you said, Trudeau, he has this idea that he's the best in the world. He knows the best what to do, and he just destroyed Canada.
Yeah. The point you just raised about ethics, I think that a politician, before we vote for a politician, they should have had enough of a track record so that the voters can look at the individual and their track record to see, does this person have a strong sense of ethics? If they have not been in the public life long enough so that the people can see that they have a strong ethical foundation, then maybe they need to wait a little bit longer before they run for parliament. We need to look for people with not strong opinions, but strong ethics, honesty, track record of not being bought, not being pressured by, let's say, wealthy businesses wanting illegal activities under the table, like Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau was pronounced guilty of an ethics violation with what's called the SNC-Lavalin affair. And he actually interfered with justice. He ended up firing the justice minister because she would not comply. Now in Canada, it's a criminal offense to obstruct justice. And he did this in front of the entire country. And he should be in a penitentiary now. It's a massive scale, his infraction. But that is just an illustration of what kind of ethics does the person have before I will vote for them.
Yeah. Okay. Kirk, thank you very much, and I wish that we can talk in the nearest future, because there is a lot of topics, and so thank you very much for this big portion of information about, I would say, universal mechanisms of power.
Yeah.
It happened in Canada, but it happens in so it already happened in Argentina, and it happened in Poland. It repeats itself, but we do not learn lessons from these histories.
Yeah, so sad, but true.
That's true. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Jan. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
The pleasure to talk with you as well.